All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, class. Uh, Welcome. Today we are going to be discussing the two readings that we had over Zinn's A Young People's History, or A Young People's Guide to U.S. History, chapters 1 and 2. And then we're also going to be discussing the other reading, which is Schweikart's and Allen's A Patriot's Guide to U.S. History. Zinn's first two chapters, and then Schweikart and Allen's first chapter. It's going to cover mainly the three main points that we're going to cover is Columbus's relations with the Arawak, okay, the early settlers' relations with the Native Americans, and then lastly, slavery in the early colonial era. But before we get to that, we are going to have a couple bell ringers first. Let me share my screen here so you guys can see that. There it is. All right. So here we are. So the first one here is, what do you know about slavery in colonial America? Now, take your time, answer this as thoroughly as you'd like, but I want you to like go in depth enough that you feel comfortable, right? Go as mundane as a brief overview of what you know, whether that be, that it started in 1619, ended at the Civil War, or you could go more in depth, talk about specific practices. You can go into the slave trade routes and stuff like that. Whatever works. If you need time to like write this down, feel free to pause the video, come back whenever you've got it figured out, and then just continue. But it is super important that we do answer these because it does tie in at the end. And then the second one, same thing. If you were a farmer in early colonial America, do you believe that you would have owned slaves? Why or why not? And obviously, it's very easy to just say no, okay? But I honestly want you to just take a minute, just set aside whatever you may be thinking, okay? Take a minute, pause the video, really think it out. Try to get into the mindset of being a colonist at this time. Think about all the pressures that you were facing, right? Relations with Native Americans, the fact that you were on a land by yourself with maybe 4 or 5 munition shipments from England a year. Like, you have to survive the winter, okay? You have to grow your own food. You're there to make money, and this is really tough. All right, try to get into the mindset because it's, like I said, it's really easy for us to just write it off. Of course I would. All right, but if it were truly that easy, like, they wouldn't have done it. So just try to get into the mindset as best you can. Answer it as honestly as you can. And then, like I said, please do actually answer it because we will need those answers because they do tie in at the end, right? So take a minute here, do that. Like I said, feel free to pause it if you need to, but I think that's enough time for you guys. So we are going to jump in to readings, and right away, like I said, the three topics, we got those. The first one, Columbus's relations with the Arawak. Zinn covers his in a very different way than Schweikart and Allen. Zinn tends to focus on specifics. He draws upon primary sources, specifically journals from Columbus. He pulls out specific instances, like leading the Arawaks onto like an impossible mission, he calls it, of searching for gold, even though there's no gold on the island. And then when they can't do it, they kill them. Like, it's very specific, and he focuses in on the atrocities that Columbus and his men committed against the Arawak. Schweikart and Allen, they don't. They gloss over the specifics and rather give an overview of a brief timeline of events. Like, this is when he landed. This is what he was there to accomplish. This is why he wanted to accomplish it. And this is what he did accomplish. They skip over the specifics, and it really leaves out they don't tie in the primary documents the way that Zinn does. Zinn focuses real heavily on that because he wants to. Zinn seems to want to. He seems to want to focus in on the mindset that Columbus was in at the time, and seems to want to bring to light certain things that aren't taught in schools nowadays. Schweikart and Allen, they seem to be arguing in Columbus's defense, but indirectly, right? They're not specifically saying, "Oh, what he did was okay," because they don't even bring it up. They sort of want to leave that to the mystery of it. They don't bring it up almost because they feel it may be indefensible, is my guess. But their reasoning is their reasoning. But this is what we're left with: is they gloss over it. Zinn does not. Zinn goes deep into the specifics. Then that's about that. Then early settlers is the next topic that's brought up in both. Zinn again focuses heavily on the specifics of his writing. One example of this is telling of the winter of 1609 and 1610. If you recall from the reading, it was a very long, cold winter. The settlers ran out of food. They didn't have enough food. They were stuck digging up dead bodies, eating their animals. It was a real rough time. And then Zinn also mentions that some of the settlers deserted the settlement and just went to go live with the Native Americans because at least they knew they would have food. Zinn then talks about how in the spring, when the governor of the settlement requested to the Native American chief he send back these settlers, and the chief refused. The governor of the settlement just went over and massacred mass numbers of these Native Americans for seemingly no reason, just because the chief would not send back the settlers. Again, this is another instance of Zinn going into specifics, like bringing to light certain atrocities that happened, seemingly just for the purpose of getting those out there, because he feels like they're not being told. Schweikart and Allen, they also write about the winter, but instead of addressing the unprovoked attack on the Native Americans, they focus on the astounding miracle for America's survival. They talk about what happened after the attack. They don't focus on the attack at all. Like, they mention it, but they don't go into the specifics the way that Zinn does. They seem to once again gloss over it and then talk about how great it was that following spring, just as the settlers were getting ready to give up on the settlement, a munitions ship from England came in and delivered supplies so that they could keep the settlement going. It's just another example of what happened with Columbus's treatment of the Native Americans. Zinn seems to focus in on these things, seems to bring up the specifics, seems to push a narrative, and Schweikart and Allen are more focused in just giving an overview of what happened with few specifics, just to get the story told, to get part of the story told, a brief overview of the story told. Then finally, the last topic covered by Zinn and also covered by Schweikart and Allen is slavery in the early colonial era. So we see here, Zinn focuses his second chapter on the institution of slavery in early colonial America. Zinn addresses why he believes that American slavery differs from other instances of African slavery in Europe. And the specific reason that Zinn brings up is that he believes that the American institution of slavery was driven on racism and greed. And that differs from England because he claims that Americans truly believed that they were superior in all facets to the African slaves. And then also that it was a near limitless profit that they could make by enslaving these slaves. It's a bold claim. It's saying that that what the American settlers did was vastly worse than what European slavery was, and not just because of how we treated our slaves, but because of the mentality that went into it. And while there may be individual cases where that could be true, it's that would be a very difficult thing to, facilitate, like a very difficult thing to prove, that that was the nationwide mentality. It may have been the nationwide mentality once we, like, after 100, 200 years of just generation after generation after generation being born, seeing these people enslaved, and then them formulating the opinion, oh, we're just better than them. But whether that was the case in 1619 when those first 20 slaves came to Jamestown, that's going to be very difficult to prove. Schweikart and Allen, they address the beginnings of the institution of slavery in early colonial America too. They note that the true status of slaves held in early colonial America is uncertain. They make the argument that, well, we don't know if that was the case. We don't know if we enslaved them because we thought we were better than them. Like, we just don't know that. He notes that they very well could have been, seen as indentured servants. They give an example of a man who was freed after 7 or 8 years of work, given a cow, given a piece of land, and just sent on his way. But he also notes, they do note that in the southern colonies, this attitude began to shift in the 1660s. And they openly say that, quote, the Southerners viewed them as permanent servants. And in 1664, some southern colonies declared slavery hereditary, which means that slaves cannot, like slavery is passed from child to child. So if you were the child of somebody who was sold into slavery, you were a slave. There was no escaping it. It was lifelong service. So they do note that. And that really wraps up the first 2 chapters of Zinn's readings, and the first chapter, or the first 2 chapters of Zinn readings, and everything that Schweikart and Allen talk about in chapter 1 that correlates with Zinn's readings. So yeah, just it's a lot of information, but it's something that we got to focus on, because it's a very controversial subject, especially when it comes to the slavery things. And the main thing that we need to remember is we gotta step back from our lives. All right, we gotta step back from where we are now and try to get into the mindset. Try to be a historian and get your mindset into where the colonists were at that time. It's really important, or else, because we can judge all day, but at the end of the day, we don't know what we would do unless we were in their specific situation. And it's impossible for us to be in their situation. So with that being said, just because it's impossible doesn't mean we can't try. And that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to move us over here to Tribulations. It is a Google Slides game that I made up here. So here's the thing. I'm going to ask you guys to get out a sheet of paper, get out your phone, try to type on something, but keep documents of this. Try to write it down wherever you put your bell ringers. And again, if you did not do the bell ringers, because I'm sure some of you guys didn't, please pause the video now. Make sure you have those bell ringers, because it's super important, because it's going to tie into the end of this. All right. So write all of your answers down. Keep track of your points, all of that. It's just a fun little game. See how well you did. And then we'll discuss our findings afterwards, right? So the rules. You are the governor of a colonial settlement, okay? Your settlement consists of 10 farmers, 5 soldiers, and yourself, all right? And rules continued. Every 2 years, or rather every year, so 2 minutes of real time, you will have a prompt that you must respond to, right? And however you respond will decide what consequence you receive, all right? Every person begins with $500. You gain $10 for every farmer that you have alive at the end of each turn. So remember, you have 10 farmers to start out with. For every farmer you have alive at the end of each turn, at the end of each prompt, you will gain $10. All right, the person with the most money at the end of the 5 turns or 5 years is the winner. All right. If you have any questions, pause the video, go back through those rules. But it's a super straightforward game. I'm sure you guys got it. All right, and then begin. So the first prompt: it is springtime in your colony. What does your group prioritize this year? Do you guys A, build better shelters for the winter, just in case of cold months, stuff like that? You never know what's going to happen. Do you B, stock up on food in case of a long winter? Because if the winter runs long, you guys might run into the problem that the colonists faced in like the 1609, 1610 winter where they ran out of food. Don't want that. People starve. It's not good. Or do you focus on tobacco? Growing that more, focusing on those tobacco crops, not focusing on your food, so that you can ship that back to England, get more money. All right, I'll give you about 10 seconds to think about it. If you need more time, feel free, once again, pause the video, take your time, but make sure you write down your answers. I cannot stress this enough. Write down your answers. All right, ready? All right, it was a short and mild winter, okay? Not too bad, just a normal average winter. If you chose A, so if you chose to build up better shelters just in case of a longer winter, no worries, nothing harmed you, and you are now immune from any weather related events in the future, okay? If you chose to store up on food, just in case of a longer winter, you were able to trade your extra food with the Native Americans. So add $50 to your account. And if you C, chose to grow extra tobacco and not focus on your food, you were able to trade extra tobacco with England, add $100 to your account. All right, and then also it is the end of a turn, so everybody still has 10 farmers, so add another 100. All right, make sure to do that at the end of each one. I'll try to remind you here. Now, prompt 2. It is the middle of a long, cold winter. You are running low on food. Nearby is a Native American settlement. Do you A, attempt to trade with them for food? Just walk over diplomatically, just show them that you are friends. Do you try to do that? Do you B, threaten them for food? Walk up with your swords, your muskets, and just be like, hey guys, listen, we're hungry and you're going to give us food? Or do you C, plan a surprise attack to steal their food, sneak up on them in the night, kill the men, kill everybody, and just steal their food so that you survive? All right, once again, give you a couple seconds here. Again, just remember, write down all these answers. I keep saying it, but it's super important. All right, if you chose A, which was to walk up there and try to trade for food, approach diplomatically, your attempt to trade with the Native Americans was successful. You survived the winter, but lose $50 for the money that you spent to get the food. B, your threat provokes the Native Americans and a fight breaks out. So if you chose to threaten them, your threat provoked them and a fight breaks out. 2 of your farmers die. So you will only get $80 at the end of this turn. Okay. C, if you chose C to plan a surprise attack to kill everybody and take their food, your surprise attack is successful. So you do defeat them, but 1 of your farmers dies in the struggle. And you only lose 1 farmer compared to the other 2 because you caught him off guard. You got him by surprise. So 1 of your farmers dies. So if you chose C, you only get $90 at the end of this turn. If you chose B, you get 80 since 2 of your farmers died. If you chose A, you still get your full 100, but you did lose 50 there, so you'd only add 50 really. All right, prompt number 3. A ship arrives selling African slaves. Each slave that you purchase will act as a farmer for your settlement, and it lasts for the rest of the game. Do you A, buy a certain amount of slaves? B, not buy any slaves? C, decide to hire a certain number of indentured servants instead. Indentured servants will work the same as slaves. They produce the same as a farmer, the same as a slave, but they only last for the 1 turn, not for the rest of the game. Okay. keep in mind, every farmer that you have earns you $10. Okay, so just keep that in mind, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, again, give you 10 seconds, and once again, remember to write everything down here. All right, if you chose A, so you bought a certain amount of slaves, I need you to subtract $5 for every slave that you bought. Okay, but gain $10 in farming returns for every slave that you bought because they do act like farmers. All right. B, if you chose not to buy slaves, didn't buy indentured servants either, nothing good nor bad happens this turn. Just rest easy. And then make sure to add $10 for however many farmers you still have alive. Same with A. So if you chose A, $10 for every slave plus $10 for every farmer. All right. Same with C. All right. If you chose to buy indentured servants instead, lose $5 for every indentured servant hired, but remember to add $10 for every indentured servant hired, plus $10 for every farmer you have alive. All right. And then when it's all said and done, remember, if you bought slaves, they stay with you for the rest of the game. Okay. If you bought indentured servants, this is the only time that they affect you. You're done with them. All right. Now, moving on here. 4, it is springtime in your colony. What does your group prioritize this year? Same as number 1. We're just going to run through it again. Okay? Build up better shelters for winter, stock up on food in case of a long winter, or focus on tobacco to earn more money. Okay? Give you a couple seconds. All right. This time it was a long and cold winter. Okay? So if you chose A, you were able to keep warm, but the winter was too long for your food supply. 2 of your farmers starved to death. Okay? So if you chose A, take off 2 of your farmers from your sheet. All right? They died. B, you decided to grow extra food just to make sure that you guys were heavily supplied enough. All right? You were well fed this winter, but the cold weather did kill one of your farmers. Now, this is super important. If you chose A on the first prompt, so you chose to build better shelters the first year, ignore it if you chose B. All right, you did not lose a farmer to the cold because you're immune from those weather effects since you already had the better shelters. All right, but if you didn't choose A, remember to kill off one of your farmers because they did die to the cold. C, if you chose to focus on tobacco during the summer and fall, you were cold and hungry all winter. 2 of your farmers starved to death, and 1 was killed by the cold weather, unless you chose A for the first prompt. But you do gain an extra $100 for the extra tobacco that you grew. So when that's all said and done, factor what you got, and then factor in your farmers, and factor in slaves if you have them. Remember, $10 for each of them. Okay, make sure you're keeping track of those numbers. And then pause if you need more time, but we're just going to keep on moving here. 5, your slaves, if you have them, are complaining of being overworked. So only address this question if you own slaves. If not, just add your money for slaves, and or I guess you won't have slaves. But if you don't have slaves, just factor in your farmer's wealth one more time and pretend like this question doesn't exist. But if you own slaves, your slaves are complaining of being overworked. Do you A, ignore them and tell them to get back to work, B, punish them with a whip, or C, give them an hour break every day? All right? They're complaining that they're overworked. The sun's beating down on them. They're getting all sweaty, all tired. They're just not, they're getting fatigued, and they just need a break. All right, so how do you treat them? Give you a couple seconds here. All right. If you chose to ignore them and tell them to get back to work, your slaves disheartenedly get back to work, but only produce 75% of their usual workload. So you're going to add the $10 for your farmers, okay? But you're only going to add $7.50 for each slave this time, all right? Since they're overworked. If you chose to whip them, your slaves quickly get back to work, but their injuries only let them produce 60% of their usual workload. So instead of $10, they're only going to be making $6 per slave this turn. C, If you chose to let them rest for an hour a day, awesome. Your slaves are grateful, but their hour break only lets them produce 90% of their usual workload. So instead of $10, they're only making $9 this turn. All right, and that's it. So after give yourself some time. Feel free to go back in the video and make sure you got your numbers right. All right. Now factor up all your money. See how you did. All right. And feel free to shoot me an email. Feel free to comment on D2L. Let me know how you guys did. I'd really like to see who the winner was. That'd be super cool. All right. Now, to round this thing off, let's just discuss what we did here. Okay. There's two things I need to know, or I want you guys to look at. Okay. The first one is, how did you answer your second bell ringer? Did you say that you would never own slaves that you would never have owned slaves if you were them? If you were in their mindset, you were in their predicament, all of that. Not knowing what you know now, if you were back then. Okay? I need you to look at that answer. Okay? And then I need you to see what you did in the game. Did you buy slaves in the game? If you didn't, and you said you never would have in the bell ringer, awesome, you're consistent. Okay? But then I need you to see how much money you would have made if you had bond slaves. Okay? And not only money, because money isn't everything, but see how better off like your settlement was, like it would have been if you had bought slaves. See what your chances of survival would have looked like if you had bought slaves. You would have been able to trade more. You would have had more protection through trading for weapons, selling more tobacco to England, and in return getting more money, more provisions, more security, all of this stuff. Obviously not advocating for slavery here, but this is stuff that you have to keep in mind. We're trying to get to the mindset of what these settlers were going through, because it's super important as historians to do that, to just don't focus all of your attention on the facts. Look at the facts, but then look for the context to the facts, because that's super important in understanding the mindset of where those settlers were. All right. Now, other than that, I believe that is all we have to go. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed the lesson. Again, please let me know how you guys did on that game. It wasn't the most impressive game, but I'm kind of proud of how it turned out. So let me know. Feel free to shoot me an email. Other than that, have a good day, guys. Be well.